Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gustavo, like Akita presented. This is Renan, Gustavo and Renan. We both are software engineers on Nubank. And Nubank, for those who don't know, we are a fintech, which main product is a credit card with an app. So the whole idea is to empower the user to take control of their financials through the app. Nowadays, we're just working with credit card, but the idea is to become a full-fledged bank as we move forward. Right. So a little bit of base stats here. Nubank received over $200 million in 5 rounds of investments. We reached 1 million customers last year. We have around 500,000 people on the waiting list, and we counted 500 employees. I think it was last month or the month before. And we were elected last year the favorite card of Brazilians. So on the upside, in the stats, we have this traffic of over 2 billion Kafka messages and HTTP requests, distributed across 100 microservices. We have 4 vertical scalability units, which are shards. Is the way we organize collections of customers into infrastructure. It's kind of an infrastructure segmentation for sets of customers. So that's how we managed to isolate the infrastructure in order to be to scale indefinitely. And we have around 1,000 instances running at the peak time. So everything has a beginning, and ours was not much different from any other startup. We started in a little house here in São Paulo. This house was located in the south side of the city. And, there was very few people, the CTO and a bunch of engineers. Most of the people were generalists. There were no specialists on the team. And everybody was doing everything, mostly. So we had the engineers working on the backend, on the core backend code. And from time to time, eventually when we wanted to experiment with something in the broad environment, we would write the recipes ad hoc, right there. Okay, we need a recipe for Kafka. We need a recipe for Zookeeper. So we used to tackle infrastructure in an ad hoc manner. So it was around this time that we defined the tech stack. We're much fans of functional programming languages, and we are heavy users of Clojure. We have a few talks around the internet, demonstrating that. And we decided we wanted a functional programming. We wanted the environment to be an environment where the programming language style, the programming language and style would be, predominantly functional. So, and that style, spilled out into the infrastructure as well. We tackled the infrastructure in an immutable approach. So every time we would want to spin a new Nubank, we would, get the Git repo, press enter, and we would have a full new Nubank being created on our AWS account. So it was pretty cool, and we were able to tear down the old one. So 2014 started, and we had a kind of a hard deadline, which is this April 1st, which is kind of a famous date for us there. There was the regulatory concern. After this date, it would be much harder to get a credit card license, so we had to do a little bit of a crunch in order to get this card on the street along with the app. So in order to do that, we had some external partner integrations, and it was kind of in this period that we need some more specialized guy, in order for us to be able to configure those VPNs and that's more specific networking stuff on the cloud and integrating with physical data centers and stuff like that. So it was around this time that we dropped a little bit of we need a more specialized guy in order to do this. So after this April 1st, we met the deadline, and we were able to get the card on the street. And a few months later, we had around 200 customers. And those 200 customers were mostly from our friends and family cohort. So everybody I invited and the first employees of Nubank invited. So, we didn't have much traffic on the app. We had, at this time, we did not have we had almost no visibility on the operations. So around this time that we were operating, we started feeling a little bit of the pain of not having a centralized monitoring platform. So we were kind of operating in the dark. We had, some base ops metrics going on, but we never kind of knew if everything was all right or no or not. So they were pretty noisy, actually. And concurrently, we started having scalability issues in our continuous delivery pipeline. We have this test suite that we run. Every time you build or introduce a change in one of our services, we test your service against a whole set of all the other services in Nubank to ensure no compatibility issues, schema compatibility issues would break some of the business flows and stuff like that. So that was a heavy test, pretty much like the integration test, the acceptance test that tests the whole flow from releasing a card on the streets to closing a bill. We had this. It was a very large suite, and we started having scalability issues with this environment as well. And at the same time, we were facing those issues. We were getting ready to scale. So we had this environment on the cloud, which we could scale indefinitely by just launching more instances. We were kind of we were not kind of really worried with that, but we got to get ready. So we focused on getting the application kind of ready as much as we could predict to put it live. So around the end of 2014, we had 16 microservices. We started around with 3. In 1 year and a half, it became 16. The business scope of what we were doing was increasing, really fast, and we needed to add more and more services. Engineers too, we hired, we started with 4 or 5, and now we got to, at this point we had around, 16, 17 engineers. I don't remember quite well, but, and the California house was not scaling. So we decided to move into a bigger building. And 2015 started, and we were kind of this new building, and lots of people coming and requesting cards and accounts. We were pretty happy at the time, and we really decided, okay, we need to invest some heavy time into operations and monitoring. And it was around this time that, okay, we need a team focused on building this basic monitoring platform. So we had these 2 full-time engineers working on that. And the base thing that we were focused at the time was getting this operations health monitoring working. The classic the classic endpoint that you do a HTTP request on, and it returns, oh, the service is okay, it can connect to the database, it can publish a Kafka message, and stuff like that. So it was around this time that, okay, we need that, really. and in order to do and have this basic infrastructure this basic infrastructure visibility going on, we had to fix some of the old recipes that accrued some kind of technical debt at the time. Everybody was kind of in a crunch mode to get the app on the street, and the infrastructure recipes suffered a lot with that. So we had to do a lot of cleanup in order to get the recipes with our monitoring agents configured properly. And along with that, we had this end-to-end environment, which I mentioned before, and we decided to clusterize it. So at the beginning, it was a little jetty box with 7 or 8 jars on it, and one day the jetty box blew up, and our pipeline got clogged for days. And I'd say, okay, this is not going to work. We need a clusterized solution for that. So that's when we decided to move forward with that approach. And as we solved those basic visibility problems, we got more scope. People thought, oh, okay, you guys solved those, we need more. So it was good actually, because the company was growing and we got even more engineers to work on that. So we had new responsibilities, and we were responsible, besides the monitoring that we were kind of evolving. We did not stop evolving the monitoring at that moment, but we got new tasks, new stuff to do, like security, taking care of updating infrastructure components and hardening and stuff like that. Engineering productivity, which basically addressing the issues of our continuous delivery pipeline. Production stability, which is keeping the services up at any means, and IT ops, which, okay, at the time when, around this time, we started hiring a lot of people to help us in our back office operation, and there were a lot of laptops, office internet, and all that stuff went to us. We used to take care from Kafka brokers, Zookeeper cluster, office internet, laptops. It was a big mess. It was quite chaotic, but it was interesting. And the problem is that the pattern that raised from this configuration is that everybody there was kind of becoming that kind of an ops hero, infra guy pattern, and that's not very kind of a healthy, because we were starting to get disconnected from other teams in terms of understanding what was really going on. We were just in defensive mode all the time. A machine went down, the cluster borked and stuff like that. So it was not very healthy. And as an attempt to reduce this friction concerning these interruptions, we tried to, on each team, have a guy who committed himself to, okay, I'm going to learn a little bit more of infrastructure, about cloud, Amazon, and stuff like that. So they would do a little bit of triage for us before, buzzing, oh, my service is down, and and it was not down. So this triage was very helpful to reduce a little bit of the noise that we received from other teams. But that did not help, because we got more engineers, we got more squads, and we were being interrupted. We couldn't handle it. It was too much interruptions all the time, and we felt like we were not being productive. We couldn't evolve the architecture. It was not very pleasant feeling. And we started, okay, we have too much interruptions, and we were taking care of this big scope. How do we fix it? So we began attacking the interruptions problem. So the first one is the IT ops hat that we kind of grabbed. And we said, oh, we need to hire a guy to take care of this. We cannot handle it. We had, more than 50 or 60 people working on our back office operations at the time. And we couldn't handle, the laptops failing and then the internet not working and stuff like that. So we had to hire a guy, and we successfully hired. He saved our lives. Actually, when he started, everybody was really happy. And along with that, hiring that guy, we decided, okay, we need to enforce the service ownership across the teams. Up until then, everybody knew who were responsible for each part, but it was not, nobody written that on stone. It was kind of a loose thing, and we worked on making that ownership, the service ownership thing, right. Okay, you're this squad, you do this service, and this service, and you try to monitor it, because we are not able to predict whatever, how your service behaves during the day. So we started working on this ownership thing. And when we did these two fronts, the IT ops and the service ownership, when we got those two things kind of sorted out, we realized that this squad, DevOps, did not make any sense anymore. It was just, DevOps is a culture, it's not a team, a team was created with a generic name and got this large scope, but after a little while, it was very clear that it did not make any sense. So we decided to implode the squad, say, okay, after the end of the year, the squad is done. The people who had experience with infrastructure and cloud, we would spread those guys in different teams that had more demand for cloud work, and it was done. No more gigantic surface of interruptions.
So yeah, as Gustavo was saying, we had this moment that we imploded the squad of ops, but it was not the only thing that was changing back then. So in 2016, besides the squad implosion, we were also too big for the second time, and we had to change offices. So we started working at this brand new office, and we thought, whoa, this is a big, big office with 8 floors. How long can we stay here without relocating? And the answer is that we're still there, so that's great. And also the other thing that was going on is like while we moved to the brand new office and imploded with the now old squad of ops, we had this bigger reorganization, restructure in Nubank as a whole. So we kind of decided to apply the Spotify squad model in Nubank. And at this point, the Spotify squad model made a lot of sense because it was comprised of multifunctional teams that were responsible for the whole business flow. So when we imploded the squad, there were also some other changes in our infrastructure and in our structure as organization, I mean Nubank. So beyond this service ownership thing that Gustavo just mentioned, we created 2 other new squads that would tackle specific infrastructure issues. One of them was information security, InfoSec squad. The other one was ID Ops, this squad of us lonely warrior that solved a lot of issues for us back then. And also there was this idea, how can we make infrastructure still evolve if there is no squad dedicated for that? So the evolution of the horizontal infrastructure become everyone's responsibility. But before we jump into that, let's explain a little bit of the Spotify squad model. So in Spotify squad model, we have this basically these 3 concepts. A squad is a multifunctional team that's responsible for part of the business flow. And by being part of the business flow, it takes care of everything since development, monitoring, deploying, operations, customer experience, all of this is within a squad. So to give you a better example, we would have like a squads like acquisition that would take care of the whole acquisition funnel for new customers, or bills that would take care of closing bills, generating bills, all the bugs related to that. And yeah, so the chapter is another concept in the Spotify squad model that's more like a congregation of specialists in an area, sort of a chapter of software engineers, a chapter of data scientists, a chapter of analysts. So it's basically a division by roles or functions across the company. And a guild is a self-organized group of people with shared common interests. So it doesn't have to be within a squad or within a chapter. Any people that's interested in a subject would go and get together and discuss that matter. So to give you a better example, I would say that guild would be like guild agile, or guild research, guild user experience, guild DevOps, and that's what we're going to talk about now. So there is this so-called guilds in the Spotify squad model that transcend squads. And the guild DevOps was our idea to keep evolving the horizontal infrastructure as everyone's responsibility. So it was basically a discussion forum. You can imagine that after squad DevOps was imploded, there was still a lot of going on. And the guild DevOps were like the place that everyone that was part of the squad DevOps back then reunite and discuss those matters. And at the first was basically comprised of those engineers that were part of the squad DevOps and the DevOps buddies. So this discussion forum was about production environment, architecture evolution, monitoring, outages, operations, all the sort of things. And it had like monthly meetings and voluntary participation, so it became bigger and bigger as more people joined Nubank. And as a way to spread knowledge, it worked pretty well, but it lacked this long-term vision and actual execution of these complex tasks and features. So since Guild DevOps tackled only bug fixes and quick wins, this was the first sign of a more specialized infra teams appearing. So we saw that we had to, this issue in the company, we had to improve the way data was being accessed by our analysts and data scientists. So this is a very specialized domain. And then we thought of creating a new squad, which was named Data Infra for data infrastructure, in order to provision this ETL that extracts data from our microservice database, using Spark, and then makes them available to consume for these analysts and data science with like a unified layer on top of S3 using Databricks notebooks, and on Redshift for people to just do SQL queries. And we also had this issue because Nubank, it was in mid of 2016, and we launched our operations in 2014, and we have grown exponentially since then. And operation was like becoming more of a bottleneck in some parts of the architecture, and to like being able to always keep growing, we decided to create the sharding strategy, which is basically, okay, X thousand of customers will live here, and if I need to have more customers, I'll just create a new infrastructure that's the same, but with different customers. So this sharding strategy was our idea for scalability purposes for the future and capacity planning, all these sort of things. And by affinity, since we're going to create like these lots of databases that were the same but in different shards, by affinity it stick together with the data infra team. So this data infra team would have to create ZTL that extracts the data from the microservice database, and it will have to the final way to get data from different shards and present them in a unified layer. So yeah, this is the first sign of a more dedicated infra squad. But if we had like a team dedicated to evolve the horizontal infrastructure for Nubank, the sharding project could be settled there. But since there was none, it was together with the data infra team. But I don't know if you guys heard, but a dog with lots of owners dies of hunger. And that was exactly the case. With the Guild DevOps trying to tackle infrastructure as everyone's responsibility, it was also Non's responsibility to feed the backlog, the long-term vision, and actually evolve the infrastructure for Nubank. So the backlog was completely starved with actually everyone trying to help, but there was no dedicated personnel to do it. So people had their own backlogs in their own squads. So the changes that Guild DevOps were making was basically these quick wins and bug fixes. And as you know, if you do that for a long time and you don't refactor and you don't think of it as a long-term thing, you're just accruing tech debt by putting silver tapes and band-aids on top of it. So tech debt was rapidly increasing. In the end of 2016, our team was bigger than before. We had around 70 engineers, 85 microservices, and fortunately, as I mentioned, no office relocation. But it was the end of 2016, and we entered 2017 trying to fix this issue of no people responsible for the infrastructure backlog. So we kind of decided to create a squad to deal with this evolution, but we spent a long time trying to like get rid of this trauma, which was squad DevOps. So there was discussions about should we create a squad because we can create this ops hero infra guy pattern again, and this is so toxic. And we spent a long time just trying to figure the scope, the name of the team, and we even thought of creating the squad with the name Squad Lindo, because Lindo is not DevOps, is this beautiful recursive acronym. But you know, the management team didn't accept so well, they didn't get it. The name wasn't really well accepted. And after a lot of discussion, we decided to create a squad platform in order to deal with the infrastructure evolution. And the original idea for the squad was like, let's avoid this ops pattern, and we should be like, don't even see anything related to this defensive mode. So we won't operate anything, we'll just evolve things, we'll be a completely offensive squad. But yeah, also a dog with no owner dies of hunger. And there were some piece of infrastructure such as networking, cloud provisioning, Kafka, Zookeeper that everyone uses, and there was no owner. So to get an owner for that, squad platform became the owner for those services. And a little bit afterwards, this squad was created. We kind of finished the sharding project, and there were some engineers that were dealing with infrastructure that were like unallocated per se. And there was this issue with the company that this end-to-end test that Gustavo mentioned, and that was back in the first year was this Jetty box, and you put all the jars inside, and then you clusterized with a fleet, and then we transform it in the ECS solution. And none of them actually solved because it's a design issue. It's not like a technology issue. If you have these end-to-end tests where every team needs to go through to ship a new feature, these end-to-end tests will become more of a bottleneck for development velocity. So this team was first trying to reduce the amount of hours from pushing a commit to a master repository, a master branch in a repository, and have them in production. And they kind of did by reducing the flakiness of the tests and getting follow-up with the teams to actually fix and measuring things. And we reduced from 15 hours in average to 4 hours. But as we scale, like this is okay with 100 engineers, how would it be with 1,000 engineers? We kind of decided that this approach was not healthy, and they are now working with a consumer-driven contracts approach. And I think the first thing that we're going to see, they're going to spin it next week, and perhaps we're going to have a talk just about it. But it's our idea to have decoupled pipelines that don't have a bottleneck and as we scale. But going ahead with the history, the way we deal with infrastructure nowadays is way different than in the early stages of Nubank. So each team is now handling their own services, their own infrastructure, their development, their monitoring, and they're like getting over that. So when we imploded Squad DevOps, we kind of created this culture of DevOps, and DevOps was not the squad anymore, and was a culture. So people that develop, they also operate. And beyond this configuration where each team is responsible for the infrastructure, development, and operations, we'll have the specific teams taking care of specific infra issues. So as you see, Squad Platform is now taking care of cloud provisioning, Kafka, and container orchestration. We're creating this Kubernetes infrastructure now, and Squad Data Infra is taking care of our data pipeline, ETL, BI tooling with Databricks notebooks, Redshift. It's kind of a fun story. Data Infra created our data lake based on Cantarera because it had no data in the beginning. Squad Eng Prod is our continuous delivery team taking care of the engineering tooling and things to make development faster. Squad Authorizer is like a squad that has different infrastructure for everyone else because for compliance reasons, they need to have this remote physical infrastructure in a physical data center, not in the cloud. And they deal with all of that provisioning and also getting the network right with a way that's highly available. Also, Squad InfoSec is taking care of the security hardening, all the processes regarding security, architecture. And IDOps is taking care of our office infrastructure, such as access points, networking, telephony. And Guild DevOps is still up and running, but it's way different than it was back then. Because in the beginning, Guild DevOps was this idea just to let's solve all the issues that no one's solving. And now Guild DevOps is actually a guild that is discussing operations, infrastructure, spreading out the knowledge, having lightning talks about subjects, and this sort of things, which actually are more trying to get people onboarded with the culture and not making them afraid to jump in because it's so messy and everyone's like, oh, let's do this. And so these sort of things. But I think that the big conclusion here is that you haven't seen our final form. You haven't. I can imagine that we've changed so much until here, and all of a sudden we'll just stop changing. It's just utterly absurd. We're always looking to our process bottlenecks and how to scale organizations with excellence. We look at our productivity, with operations burden, development velocity, people happiness, all the things matter. And when we think about what's the best way for us to work. So be it security, IDOps, data infra, physical infrastructure, or even engineering productivity, we can't foresee the future of what is going to happen, but we can try to shape it and build it. So that's why we try to foresee the problems and try to get the organization right for each phase of the company. So I think that the main takeaways here are you have to have a constant evolution. If your company is evolving, why don't you evolve your infrastructure or your structure? There is no such thing as a perfect organization. We all know that. But there might be like a right mindset to keep evolving. So what I think about the right mindset is like you have to have flexibility and self-criticism. You have to be able to change and to look at what you're doing to see if the best way and to get this the always evolve mindset. And also these different sizes of companies and different styles of operations, different problems, they all require different structures. It's not it's kind of insane to think that if your company is going to grow like 10x this year, you're going to keep the same structure and everything will work the same, because it doesn't. So if you try to just push circles inside squares and sort of things just because it's the way you're doing this for over 2 years now, you'll probably regret in the future, and you see that most of the pain is because it's being created because you didn't shape your process or your organization with the problems that it has. So I think that's it. We're always hiring. Please access so.nu-vagasnu right now. Don't miss it. And thank you. If you have questions, please do it on the Twitter handle at @gbarrancos. We have to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.